Welcome to the April edition of Indie Insight. Today I have JM Landel with me. Welcome, JM, or I'm going to call you Jen.
That's great. Thanks, Marnie, for having me on. So a little bit about me. I'm Jen Landels. I write under JM Landels. I'm the managing editor of Pulp Literature Press. I'm also an author of Elenia's Song Overture, which was my first novel. And I do other stuff as well, like teach sword fighting from horseback.
Wow, that sounds scary and fun. So, wow. So could you tell us a little bit about pulp literature?
So Pulp Literature Press is a small press based out of Vancouver. We started up almost 5 years ago. It'll be this winter issue coming up at the end of the year will be our 5th anniversary, which is kind of amazing that it's been this long. We started up, we had the idea in 2013 to do a Kickstarter to start up a fiction magazine. We just felt there wasn't enough, there weren't enough platforms for starting writers to get their work out there, to get published, to get some writing creds. And we figured we knew quite a few established authors like C.C. Humphreys, J.J. Lee, Susanna Kearsley. So we asked them if they would give us a story, something that was kind of out of their usual genre, something that might be sitting under a shoebox, under the bed or whatever. And they all agreed, which was wonderful. So we had sort of feature authors to hang the name on the front of the book, and then we could publish up and coming authors alongside them. And we've been doing that 4 times a year ever since then.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it kind of amazes me sometimes when I think about it that it's been going this long and that we're still at it.
So is it Canadian-based authors, or do you have worldwide authors in your?
No, we have worldwide. We've had authors from Germany and New Zealand. We have quite a lot of authors from the States. We do have a fairly high Canadian content, and that helps us get grant money, which is important. So.
Very cool. So if someone was watching this and was interested in, being a part of it, is it something that you solicit authors? Is it something they can submit to be a part of it?
We have submissions periods 4 times a year for open submissions, and those will probably open up again this month. We haven't set the exact date. We usually open up for about 2 weeks at a time, just because we get such a flood of submissions that we have to keep it short and sweet. And we also have contests. So currently open is the Hummingbird contest, and that one opens. It will open May 1st, so it's not open yet. And the Magpie contest, which is for poets, will be closing April 15th. So those are paid contests, so there is an entry fee for those, but much smaller number of people entering, so you've got a much better chance of getting published and winning a prize of $300 or $500.
Wow, that's really cool. So not only are you working probably really hard to put together this literature magazine, you also write books.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about these?
So the one I just published in summer 2017 was Elenia's Song Overture. It's a fantasy novel. I call it a literary fantasy. It's about a mother, daughter, and grandmother. So the daughter is the main character, Elenia, but the stories of her mother and grandmother are woven in, and it's about a girl who could turn music into magic. But it's also about the relationships between mothers and daughters and the lies we tell each other, and so there's a lot of gritty women's fiction type things there, but there's also a lot of sword fighting and horse chases and action adventure as well.
Wonderful. So is this just one book or is it a series or?
It's a trilogy. So the second one will be coming out in 2019, and the third one is scheduled for 2020, if I can get it cleaned up in time.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing how the ideas will flow, but to get them actually written down and all those words that forgot to be typed as you were frantically putting it to paper. Forgot to.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
like, that word was there, I know.
Yes. Yeah, I actually finished, I finished the third book a couple of years ago. And it's like, oh yeah, I reached the end, And then I've realized since then, it's like, oh, I need to put a little bit in here and I need to put a little bit in here. And it's like, this doesn't make sense unless I do this. So yeah. But
yeah, I understand that.
The second book is pretty ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always fun. I'm redoing my first book because they changed publishers, so everything's down right now. So I'm like,
Oh.
I'm just going to restart it. I'm just going to go back and fix this stuff. I'm like, I have a little period where I'm like, why didn't you do this here, not there? And you know how that is. And that's the great thing about indie publishing. We can go back and tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, it is. That's what I love about it. It's like there's never any hard and fast end date. You can keep putting up new versions.
Exactly. As long as we keep it good and we try not to taint the system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, yeah. And it sounds like doesn't sound like you're doing that. So I ask everyone about research, and it sounds like you might actually have some life experience research that you do for your books. Am I wrong?
Well, I do teach sword fighting from horseback. So, and that comes from having a degree in medieval English literature, which is where I developed that interest, and then picking up sword fighting through Academy Duello as a hobby. But I also started doing it because I was researching another novel that I'm actually working on first draft right now. But ages ago, I had this idea for a novel, started sword fighting in order to research it, and that was almost a decade ago. So since then, I've become an instructor. I started the mounted combat program because I had horses, Academy Duello had swords. I thought, oh, these, we could do something together here. So
It sounds so dangerous, though.
Well, we use nylon swords when we're on horseback for the sake of the horses, because they didn't sign up for this. But it's actually a lot safer than a lot of equestrian activities. It's a lot safer than eventing with cross country jumps and things like that. Not that I don't do that as well, but it's. So it's actually with the safety equipment and proper training and care for each other and the horses, it's actually got a fairly low accident rate compared to a lot of sports.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I won't be doing that because I'm scared of that kind of stuff, but I'm a very big chicken, but that's okay. That's exciting. Is there any other research that you had to do to make your books authentic?
Well, because it's a fantasy, and however, my current work in progress is set in 17th century France, which I did use as an excuse to go to France last summer. Well, it's just like I like to go to France a lot anyway, but if I have a book that I can use as an excuse and write off some of that cost, that's awesome.
That is a brilliant idea. I need to do that. I'm going to write this down as an idea.
Yes.
How to get to France.
Set your novels in places you want to go to.
It's a fantastic idea. So, very short and sweet here. So, the community. I always ask about the indie community because I feel like it is essential, and it's also one of those things that really builds everyone up. I always say it's a big hippie commune of people that just really want to be helpful. At least that's my experience, that people will do anything to help promote your work. Have you had the same experience with the indie community?
Well, just the writing community in general, sort of locally in Vancouver where we're based, it's been wonderful. And pulp literature has really been a community building exercise as well, because as we sort of get out there to events. We have tables, we meet people, we do presentations, we do workshops. We start building this larger and larger circle of authors that are really, everybody is really supporting each other's work and trying to be the best they can and trying to help other people be the best they can, which is really nice. It's very warm and friendly, and not the cutthroat backstabbing world you would expect from authors competing for that every last book. We're all, I think there's a philosophy that a rising tide floats all ships, and everybody's trying to make it better for everybody else.
I like that. That's definitely the experience that I see, and I hope I help foster.
One of the things that might be of interest, if any of your listeners are in the Vancouver area or travel to Vancouver, is that we do writing retreats, and those are part of our sort of community building activities. So they take place on Bowen Island. They're up on our website. The next one coming up is May 10th, and then we have another one in May after that. So they're just one-day retreats. You come to Bowen Island, which is a beautiful island, just a 20-minute ferry ride off the coast of BC. You are treated to wonderful food, and we sit together and we write using the Hour Stories by Dale Adams Segal, which is just a system of cards and prompts that helps you write. And people get, during these retreats, they get about 2,000 to 3,000 words written during the day. We also do some career building workshops during the lunch hour. And it's just a very, it's a way of pampering yourself. And we like it too, because we pamper ourselves at the same time by sort of refilling our cups by writing with other people and having that camaraderie.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. I'm so jealous. I've talked to people from Canada recently, have been most of my interviews, except for, I guess, the last one. But everybody, like you, seem to have such an amazing people in Calgary, have bookshops that support authors. You have writing workshops. I feel like we're missing that in the States, and I'm not sure about the rest of the world if they have that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in Canada, just because our population is so small, we kind of have to. We don't get the sales, like, the sales figures in the United States for books are just so much larger than in Canada that we kind of have to sort of band together to make it work. So that may be the reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
Vancouver's a beautiful place, though. It's like we do call it Lotus Land.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, no, I love that. And maybe there are parts of the States that do have it. I feel like Oregon's probably going to have it, and I just need to move that way.
You probably just need to come west a bit, yeah.
Good. I think it'd get a little bit wester. I know I'm in Phoenix. It's a little hot. People don't care about books when it's hot. Yeah. Well, thank you for, coming to share with me a little bit about you, and I definitely am thinking about Vancouver now. I've been saying I need to get a passport. Now I'm like, one more reason to get my passport. So exciting.
Yeah, you should come up for the Creative Ink Festival in May. That's like May 18th. It's like it's not expensive, and it's just a really close-knit community, and everybody's friendly, and fabulous way to get your book seen and meet other authors. So.
Very cool. I will definitely take that in consideration.
We would love to see you up here.
Well, thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is R.M. Mulder and I am the author of the Conquest Saga. Today I'm going to talk to you about Gamelit. It's a new genre and that has stemmed from a semi-newer genre called Lit RPG. Several best-selling stories, including Brian D. Anderson's new release The Veil, are gamelit as a whole, but may not necessarily be classified as lit RPG. Brian's writing is so highly acclaimed that prior to The Veil's official release, audiobook giant Audible gave him a six-figure offer for exclusive rights to the story. The concern, however, of reader confusion between gamelit and lit RPG is real. I quote Brian in a recent Facebook comment. "It's funny, a ton of my also bots are lit RPGs. I hope they don't think The Veil is lit RPG or I'm in store for some pissed off reviews." So what's the difference? On September 4th, 2017, a discussion was held among a handful of authors, including myself, Zachariah Dracolis, Dustin Tigner, and John Ward. The concern was addressed that there was a large number of stories that were receiving poor reviews strictly based upon an orthodox definition of what a select few people believed defined a story as lit RPG. The primary issue that was discussed on that monumental date was the fact that most of these poor reviews were unsolicited, and authors who were not among the lit RPG community were also getting caught in the fray. The simple fact was this: many of these authors never intended to write lit RPG in the first place, so getting a poor review based strictly on the concept of not lit RPG as the basis of the review was quite unfair. Thus, an agreement was reached that a new term was needed for stories that contained gaming elements but did not conform to the strict standards that had been adopted for lit RPG. After several possible monikers were offered, one stood out among the others: Gamelit. We are excited to announce that the first of a quarterly anthology, Gamelit Expansion Pack, will be released on June 1st, 2018, and is currently available for pre-order at the low price of only 99 cents. So, go strap on your VR visors and dive into this epic Gamelit collection that will immerse you in several exclusive in-game expansion stories by a handful of talented authors, including USA Today best-selling authors Anthea Sharp and Brian D. Anderson. You'll also find the sequel to Conquest, Dark Force, Conquest Expansion 1. Go grab your copy today at mybook.to/Gamelit.
Today I'm with Karen Elizabeth Lee. Thank you for joining me, Karen.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. This is a real pleasure.
Wonderful. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on your show because I am an author, but I have a very, very varied background. I grew up in the country in Ontario, Canada, and thought I wanted to be a doctor or a surgeon or something, but ended up having a very interesting career. I'm now a retired psychologist, but I also did, in addition to doing individual therapy, I did work as a management consultant as well. I've also traveled around the world, both with my work and for pleasure as a tourist. So I've actually worked in the Middle East, in South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, Africa. I've been to sub-Saharan Africa. I've been to Egypt and places that you can't even go now. Syria, I visited many years ago when it was peaceful and lovely and the people were wonderful. So I've had a really varied life. I don't want to make that sound like it's over because it certainly isn't, but in reflection, I think my varied life has encouraged me now to be an author and to teach writing. So, yeah.
Very nice. So was writing something you always did, or did you stumble onto it?
Well, both, I guess. I won my first writing contest when I was 12. I did a little piece on the maple tree and won a $10 prize at the local Rotary Club. But I never thought of myself as a writer, and I did a lot of academic writing because of training to be a psychologist. You have to do an awful lot of essays and, just writing about the parts of the course that I did. And then when I was in England, I was living in England for 10 years and doing a lot of management consulting. And I was asked to do a book on management consulting. So that was pretty easy. It was with one of the big publishers, and I was told that I had kind of free reign. I could write it if I want, or I could gather authors around me to do some of the chapters, which turned out to be harder than writing the whole thing, actually. But that also got me into editing, because I had to gather the authors, suggest what they might want to write about, and then I had to edit their contributions to the book. So yeah, that was an introduction both to writing, but more technical writing. So I did a lot of writing for journals on psychology and management, what people go through when they go through changes in large organizations, that kind of thing. But later on, and it's hard to separate my life from my writing, because all of this time while I was having a lot of professional success, if you will, traveling and so on, I was living a lie in terms of my marriage. My husband was my business partner, so very difficult to just leave, because that was my income as well. And we worked together very well. So when he passed away, which he did in 1999, I knew I had to heal from that abusive marriage. And that led me into Jungian analysis, and then eventually healing and a very happy marriage today. But I also knew that I didn't understand how an intelligent professional woman got herself into, and not just one abusive marriage, but two, because my first husband was quietly abusive, let's put it that way. I didn't spot it a lot of the time until I figured out that my life was being controlled by someone else. So I didn't understand how this had all happened. And because I was doing a lot of writing, I started writing about it, writing about my marriages and my reactions and so on, but also realized that I couldn't write it. If I was going to write something about this emotional time in my life, I couldn't do it like I wrote about the technical things in my life. So I had to teach myself how to do creative nonfiction, which is a very popular genre now. But when I started out writing, it wasn't quite as popular as it is now. And I had to get books that taught me about how to write dialogue, how to write scenes, how to write character sketches and all that kind of thing, which of course I didn't have to do for my management and psychology writing. So that's kind of a long story, but I think my evolution as a writer has been over time, and definitely has evolved with the types of things I've found myself writing about. So.
Wow. Well, I know I say this all the time, but that made me want to run out and buy it and read it.
Good.
So very,
I have a copy right here.
Beautiful. So your book is called The Full Catastrophe?
Yes, it is. My book's called The Full Catastrophe. And it's the title came from a movie, Zorba the Greek, where Zorba is asked by the fellow, the Alan Bates character, "Are you married?" And Zorba the Greek said, "Married, house, wife, children, the full catastrophe." And my late husband loved that movie. We even visited the beach where it was filmed on Crete. And so I used to hear that, the full catastrophe. We have the full catastrophe, as though it was kind of a joke. But for me, it really wasn't a joke. I was living with a screaming, yelling, threatening, pot-crushing, chair-breaking man who could not control his anger. So while I do lighten the mood in the book quite a bit with the good things that happened in our lives. It was a pretty, well, it was so upsetting that when we found out that he was ill with cancer, I was in the process of thinking, how am I going to get out of this marriage? And as I say, not so easy because we were business partners as well as marital partners. And then he was diagnosed and he passed away 8 months later. So.
Well, that's really powerful.
It was a very powerful time for me. And the book is not just God ate an awful, he was a horrible man, he died, I'm free. Because it never is like that. You marry somebody because you love them, you want a life with them, they're interesting, and he was intelligent, handsome, and it's very difficult to extricate yourself when you've got all of those ties to each other. So yes, it was a very powerful time in my life, and I certainly never expected to lose him from cancer. And that was a horrific time, I would say. But I also came out of that absolutely determined that I was not going to get into another bad marriage, that I needed to heal. And that is one, if there's a powerful message in my book, it is that when you're in a traumatic situation, it is not enough just to get out. You have to heal, or you run the risk of going back into another bad situation, which I was determined not to. So.
Wow. That's actually very true and good advice for someone. Because it's easy to fall back into old habits.
Well, it is. And not everybody tells you that when you get out of a bad marriage, you need to go through a healing process, because you're not the same person that you were when you entered that marriage. You've been told you were certain things, you believed it, you denied what was going on in order to survive. And you've got to relearn healthy habits. And you've got to relearn that you're worth a good relationship if you decide to go into another relationship. So.
Yeah, I have a cat now.
Right.
I figured 15 years enough was a good run. That's a nice
Right.
try. I'm not eager to ever do that again.
I was just very lucky when I do describe in my book actually how I met my present husband, and it was one of those, well, I'll just say it was very unexpected, but every word in my book is true. So sometimes you collect more on a beach than shells. I'll just give that little hint.
That's a nice little, like, we must find out what that means. Fantastic. So I usually ask about research, but it sounds like you lived it. So,
well, yes, in a memoir, you do. You live it, and that is your research. I am in the midst of researching a new piece, however. And to do that, I went to Ireland at the end of November because I'm Irish background. And I want to write something about the place I grew up in, because it was pretty much all Irish people who came over during the famine. And I'm just kind of exploring the stories now. So I will go back to that village in June. I live out west, so I have to go back to Ontario and go back to that village and just kind of steep myself in the memories and bring up more of those stories.
So is it going to be another memoir, or do you think it'll be more of a fiction story?
I think it's going to be more of a fiction, because a lot of these things happened a long time ago, and the stories themselves are really interesting, but I want to weave into it a little bit more of the mystical and magical, because I lived in a valley, and you've probably heard of the movie Brigadoon, where the village appears only once, one day every 100 years. Well, that's what it felt like to live in the village I lived in. So I can see kind of bringing in a little bit of that mystical, magical atmosphere. So it'll be fiction based on real life incidents.
Got it. Another book that sounds amazing. So is that something that you think will be a couple years? I don't know, is your writing process very slow and methodical, or?
Yes.
And that's
I
okay.
have started already writing the stories, but I could see at least another year to 18 months. Yeah, before I get it all polished and ready to go. In the meantime, I teach writing. So.
Oh, wow. You teach writing.
Yeah, I decided because there was no course for me when I started writing my memoir about how to write a memoir or how to write a difficult memoir, that I would offer that at our local writing center here in Calgary. And it's been very successful. There are lots of people out there with difficult stories, ranging from war refugees to people who had difficult families, difficult marriages. It's life, right?
Very true.
And going to what I call a normal writing class sometimes doesn't work, because if you've got something that you want to write about that's extremely emotional, other people in the class may not be prepared for that when you read out your piece. But in my class, that's just part and parcel of the process.
Right. There's a little warning.
Yeah.
My book that is coming out started as an anthology piece, and it was supposed to be a romance about winter. And then when I decided to write the full story, it really was more. It's like, how did this woman get into this horrible marriage? And it wasn't just like, oh, she picked a bad man. There was a buildup to where she had no self-worth. So it's a little bit right now, I'm teetering. I have to like figure out where we are with it, because I'm like, I don't want it to be erotic, and I don't want it to be anything that's tantalizing. I just want her story told.
Although I would recommend you read my book, because, of course, part of the attraction to any partner is partly sexual. So I do cover that a little bit, but just enough so that it's appropriate.
Absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been like really nice talking to you. I want to ask you more questions, and do you consider yourself an indie author?
Yes, because the publisher that I did this book with is She Writes Press in Berkeley. And it is a one-off press. It's a small, what would you call it, boutique press. They only publish women's writing, which was another reason I chose them. And also I hired one of the owners to be my editor, and she was amazing. So I went ahead and published with her, and she's considered an independent press, but like a small independent press. My first book on management consulting, which was with a huge publisher in England. I can't really say that the two experiences were all that much different in a way, because nobody really helps you with your publicity. That you pretty much have to do on your own. And yeah, so both were good experiences. And
I'm actually glad you said that, because that was going to be my next question. People assume like, oh, you get one of the big, is it 6 or 5 or 8? I don't know. If you get a real publisher, then you're set, and they're going to do, no.
I did sell more books through the big publisher.
Well, yeah, you're going to probably get your books in more places.
Well, you don't have to work to get them into stores or anything like that with a big publisher, and they organize, front window displays and that type of thing, and also make sure that it's advertised around the world to other booksellers. But given that, no, the experience wasn't that much different. And a lot of people say, oh, well, no, if you're in a big publishing company, you're kind of like grist for the mill. They don't pay attention to you, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't true at all. They threw a big fancy cocktail party and all sorts of things. So that part was good. But I've enjoyed being with a small publisher as well. So, yeah.
Well, I wouldn't normally ask people this, because most people don't live in Calgary, but I've been interviewing people from your Calgary, and
yes,
they talk about the writing community and how amazing it is.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I teach at the Alexandra Writers Center, which is one of the communities, if you will. People buy a membership and then you can go on retreats and they bring in great authors. And there are courses like mine that people can sign up for. And it's everything from the brand new writer to the pretty experienced writers who have contracts with maybe not the big five, but and people my book has won awards, and we have several award-winning authors that are associated with the Alexandra Writers Center, but we also have a romance writers group that's very active. We have a sci-fi group that's very active. Yeah, I would say it is a pretty vibrant community here.
And I do know that you have a couple of bookstores that are very supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
Is it the Owl's Nest?
The Owl's Nest, we have open mic nights every month. And Shelf Life Books also does a lot of book launches. We have WordFest, which brings in big names for, in the general public, if you will. We also have When Words Collide, which is a writers' conference every August. So it gives people a chance to attend sessions where there are very well-known authors, and also like discussion groups, panel discussions, that type of thing. So yeah, there's lots going on.
I'm super jealous. You don't even know how jealous I am. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to chat with me and share. And I do plan on when I am reading again, which will be soon, I plan on definitely checking yours out. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to meet with me.
Oh, well, and thank you very much for the opportunity. That's wonderful. And if you do read it and you like it, I would love a review.
I love that. People, yes, people, we need your reviews.
Yes.
Good, bad, ugly. We love them all. Preferably not the ugly, but we'll take it.
All right.
Well, today I have John Irvine with me. Hi, John. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Marnie. Thank you for asking me.
John, will you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Crikey, how long you got? No, I'm not that interesting. What would you like to know? I'm 77 years old, and I've really only been a serious writer since 1996, when I came back from 29 years living in Australia. And that only occurred because I fell in love when I got back. And I wrote them terrible love poems, as one does. And then it sort of progressed from there. We went our own separate ways, and there we go. I suddenly found myself early one morning when I logged on, and I hadn't had a computer for very long at this point. I logged on and discovered that somehow or other I'd become a member of a writers group based in Canada, which was interesting because I was stunned, really. However, the night before, I had quite a bit of red wine, so I could have done anything. I was lucky I joined something useful.
Exactly.
However, as a result of that, I met my current wife, who was living in Greece, English woman. And not only that, I learned to write, other than love poems.
I know that you do dabble in horror.
The fiction I write is mainly horror and some sci-fi. Horror's fun. You can do or be anything you like when you write horror. You can kill people without going to prison. I mean, what a bonus. And you can kill them in the most terrible ways. My first book, however, first collection was a slender volume called Man of Stone, which is actually the name of the last poem in the book. And I didn't realize it when I put it together. But a good friend of mine said, "This is about you." I said, "Is it? Hey, what?" Don't ever even thought about it. And they were right. And I was lucky enough that a very old friend of mine had a daughter who was at art school. And I managed to con her into doing the most fabulous artwork. Sort of artwork I like, where it's not classical. It's the first publisher I approached, New Zealand publisher. That was so good, so helpful, everything. And then they sold the business. Just as I was putting together a second book.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I do have a somewhat weird sense of humour. And I can have an odd attitude to life as well. And death, for that matter.
You have a new book coming out?
Well, a joint effort between my wife and I. She's a writer and poet, and it's a collection of haibun, Japanese form of poetry, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Man of Stone follow-up is called Stoned. No, it's got nothing to do with plants.
Good.
But it's catchword, and it follows on from. I didn't want any of this rubbish like Man of Stone 2 or the sequel,
Yeah.
But anyway, I've never felt the need to write a novel. I don't feel I've got a novel in me. I'm probably not patient enough. I don't know, but it doesn't seem important.
Yeah, you have to write with what speaks to you.
Now, when are you going to ask me the question that all interviewers ask poets? Go on.
I truly don't know poetry.
Yeah, well, the question.
I truly don't know poetry. I know like Walt Whitman or maybe Maya Angelou, but I don't get it. And it might just be because I don't like interpretation. Say, well, what they really meant by the cat was this, or what they really meant by this flower was this. I'm like, I don't enjoy that. So
there's a lot of metaphor.
Yeah. So what's the question of every author? Tell me what the question is.
That every interviewee asks. Yes.
Okay.
Where do you get your ideas?
Okay. Well, where do you get your ideas?
No idea. Having said that, if I go into a competition and there's a prompt or something, I can write to those. That's no problem, or pictures. But by and large, the ideas come as a couple of words, a line. Last year I was driving to a hospital for a test, and it's an hour and a half drive. And in that hour and a half, I actually wrote a song in my head. And not only did I write the song in my head, but I remembered the whole bloody thing when I got home hours later. And now I've lost it on my computer.
It's just gone?
Well, it'll be there somewhere, but I can't remember what it was called. And the search function on this laptop is very poor.
Oh.
So or at least I haven't learned to use it properly.
Got it.
Mm.
I understand.
As my wife keeps telling me, I don't ever read anything like instructions.
Got it.
So, hey, I'm a bloke.
So you'll have to find it. You'll have to find your song.
Yeah, one day. Yeah, it'll turn up.
Well, that's good.
When I'm looking for something else.
Right.
That's when things turn up. Anyway, to answer the question that you didn't ask, quite a lot of ideas come to me in the middle of the night. I'll wake up, get up to go for a pee or something, and as us old people do, and a line it's got no relevance to anything, including the dream that I might have been having. And I've learned that not to go and get pencil and paper and write it down. If I remember the word when I wake up in the morning, it's a goer. Oh. Now, that's probably silly, but that's what I do.
Nice. But everybody has their own method. I like that.
Yeah. And then just to pop back on the books side of it for a sec, 3 of us old crackpots, all in the same rough age bracket, put together a book called Buccaneers, Sonneteers and Spittoons.
So like a Western?
No, it's a book of sonnets.
Oh,
yeah. Oh. We're all in the same. Well, I've had a poetry group online now since 2004, and these 2 blokes joined up along the way somewhere, and yet we all click together, the 3 of us. And if you have a look at the back cover of that book, there are photos of the 3 of us, and
that's cool.
It's a bloody good book. So what we did, we all like sonnets, even though we write other stuff. And both of them said, why don't we put together oh, John, can you? Yeah, right. Okay, yes, I'll do it. So anyway, I sorted it all out, and we each wrote, I don't know, 20, I forget how many sonnets now, each, and put them in this book. And it's probably been the worst seller of any of the books that I've got. But a lot of that's to do with merchandising, I believe, anyway. But it's fun. I mean, if we don't sell anymore, it's fun. And we've just got another one waiting to be published, which is not sonnets, but whatever. And that's called Frog Spawn. Poems from a Murky Pond.
I like that. Well, thank you, John, so much for taking the time out of your day to.
This has been fun.
Is it morning where you are?
It is now 27 minutes past 8. I'm half an hour late for breakfast.
Oh, well, that's.
Mind you, I make my own.
You should make your breakfast. It's actually lunchtime where I am.
Take it easy, kiddo.
You too, okay? Today's guest, JD Estrada. Thank you, JD, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Marnie.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm an indie author from Puerto Rico. I'm based right now in Atlanta, Georgia. And that does mean that I stopped drinking Coca-Cola and now I drink Sweet Dixie wine. Or Sweet Dixie champagne, sorry. No, I'm based here. I have 10 books out. I've been doing the indie thing for about 5 years now. And I like to keep it fun and varied.
Nice. Can you tell us about your books?
Well, there's a wide variety of books. There's novels, there's poetry, there's short stories, and there's other stuff. Let's start with the novels. The novels, the ones that are published are within the human cycle. The human cycle is basically my exploration of humanity through fiction, which is a fancy way of saying I have a lot of random stuff in my head and I need to get it in a book. The first book is Only Human, and the second book is Shadow of a Human. And basically, the second book takes place 2 years after the first book, and the third book is in process of being outlined because I have so many things on the plate that I just want to finish other projects before I tackle that last one, because they, although I love them and I love the characters, it's a strain and it's a drain because I put a lot of myself in the books. I'm a big fan of Easter eggs, and it's not just tributes to authors. It's tribute to authors, video games, bands. There's always people say, did you put this because of this band? And I'm like, yes, that character is named Rosie because I'm a fan of AC/DC. Or this lyric, these 3 words of a lyric were put there because I'm a fan of the Eels, or I'm a big fan of Pearl Jam. And that one, everyone goes like, yeah, I see that one. Basically, it follows Nathaniel Reynolds is a jaded reporter, not having the best of times, not loving his job, completely over the fact that he's a reporter because he can't report the truth because he has to either cater to the masses or the powers that be and edit himself. He's also a writer, and he's amassed about 18 pages of he can't even get a word. He's not having the best of days. Since he's a reporter, he's not exactly well-to-do, and his dinner is going to be this pathetic pretzel. It would have been 1 star, but luckily it had, good brown mustard, so it's a 2-star meal. Goes to the subway, hating his life, and suddenly there's no one there. Obviously, he misses his train, and obviously he hears the tapping of a boot, and he goes like, what? And then he hears a violin in the subway late at night when there's no one there. One thing happens, and he's abducted. And when he wakes up, he realizes quite quickly that he was abducted by a vampire. So basically, it's my exploration of the hero's journey, doing as many twists and turns and flipping gender roles and doing as much weird things I can do that, oh, this is what's going to happen. And I go like, let's pivot. And then let's pivot again. And people go like, okay, I have no idea where we're going. And that's part of the fun for me. It's also, since I said it's an exploration of humanity, I do have to explain one thing. The first book focuses mostly on the physical aspect and how the physical aspect of whatever happens to Nathaniel impacts him as a human or whatever he will become ultimately. The second book explores more what the psychological impact is. I did a lot of research on Jungian psychology. I do explore versions of the female manifestations, the inner child, and the shadow aspects within Nathaniel, while also exploring things that allude to the collective unconscious. As you can see, I like to keep things really simple because I like random things like that. In college, I studied psychology 3 years. I needed help with scholarship, and that particular institution wasn't helping me out. I tried switching to communications and to business because it's so convoluted. I wasn't able to do that, so I switched colleges and I studied psychology, advertising, and marketing. And so I have these different influences, even in a college education level, that I like and enjoy letting it seep into everything I do, be it in books or what I do as in marketing. So that's the novels. Then there's poetry. And I always love to talk about poetry because people say, okay, you're a dude and you're writing poetry. And I go like, why is that a weird thing? People say, you know, apparently I need a beret and I need a glass of wine and a mandolin or something so that people can understand it. And for me, I think part of the mission as a creator is to show that poetry is not just one thing. There's a lot of people who say, oh, I don't like poetry. And I'm like, have you tried this? And they say, no. Have you tried that? And they say, no. I'm like, how about this? And when I say this, that, and this again, I mean Bukowski in one side and Dickinson in another side, and Maya Angelou in another side. And if you see those three things, they're very different, even though they're all poetry. So I don't buy the whole thing that people say I don't like poetry, because to me it's the same as someone says I don't like books. I'm like, have you read this? No, you know, I don't like that. And then if you dig deeper, you find out what they like and you recommend something and they're like, I've never heard of that. And it's like, I have a birthday gift for you. Well, I take the same approach in regards to poetry. Each poetry collection varies in length, theme, and feel. And basically, I treat each one basically like and I'm saying basically a lot, but that's today's episode of Indie Insight is brought to you by Basically.
It's a drinking game.
If it's a drinking game, two things. One, if I say basically, and two, if I touch my face or do something. That's something that in all my booktube videos I get criticized for, and they say like, can you touch your face a little less? And I'm like, that's just how words come out.
I say that's cool.
Yeah.
I say that's cool.
Yeah. Whatever. It's whatever goes. But I do treat each poetry collection like an album. The first one is called Between the Tides, Ebbs of Thought Through Poetry. I was hell-bent on having a cover that had a picture that I had taken, because if you're going to go indie, go all the way, right? I might redo the cover using that same picture just to give it some more depth and texture. But it's near my home surf spot in the Piñones Stretch in Puerto Rico. Anyone who visits the island and wants like a really good beach day, that's a really nice place I recommend. But between the tides, there's high tides and low tides, and there's a lot in between that happens. So there are some aspects in that poetry collection that are really deep. And to give you an example, there's a poem called The Sea, and it's basically a very honest take on who I think I am in terms of emotions, personality, and just all whatever's in this brain. It's very honest to the point that it's not that I'm magnificent. It's saying that we are volatile humans, and that within our brains, there's a lot of stuff going on all the time. And then there's a poem about cheese and everything in between. I do poetry about food, drink, life experiences, deeper things. Then the second poetry collection is called Dark Strands. And it's actually the shortest poetry collection because I wanted a really short poetry collection. And I got, the first time I took that collection to a Comic-Con, which people also ask me, why do you take poetry to Comic-Con? And I'm like, because people read poetry and geeks like poetry. And I've had several experiences where people who are in full cosplay, they go like, oh, I love this book. And I'm like, so you've read it? And they're like, I bought this last year and this poem means so much for me. So try to imagine like, you know, Chun-Li or Vegeta saying that to you point blank. And you're like, yeah, geeks like poetry. Dark Strands, I actually had someone go like, you're going to charge me this for this? And I'm like, if you want, you can read it right now. The whole thing. And if it's worth your money, you can take it. And if not, you can leave it. I don't mind. The person in question read the entire collection, and every so often she would go like, and she would look at me and go and just not understand, like, you wrote this. And I'm like, yes, I write about vampires, but I like poetry. She read the entire thing in about 45, 50 minutes, standing there. It was a really interesting dynamic. She finishes, she holds the book and she goes like, wow, that was really nice. I'm going to buy this, and I'm going to also share it with people. And I'm like, I don't think it's often that you get like instant gratification as an author like that. It was very cool for me, and it just validated that taking poetry to a comic convention is worth your time. So that's the second poetry collection. I say that it's short, but it's also complicated. It includes two things that were complicated. One is actually a page that is dark strands. It is 4 haikus or 4 micro poems. Most people read them sequentially. And then a couple of months in, I said, you know that you can read it out of order and it still makes sense. And people went like, what? And they read it, and they would read the third one and the first one and then the fourth one and the second one. And they're like, oh, that's creepy. And I'm like, exactly. So whereas some people thought it was really simple, if you dig a little bit deeper, you go like, oh, there's something more here, which is something I also try to do either in my prose or poetry. What I do say nonstop is that the last poem in that collection is the hardest one I've ever written. It's not the longest one, but it is the hardest one. It is called Miranda and the Broken Ghost. It is 8 stanzas, 9 lines to a stanza, and the rhyme scheme for each stanza is abacadabra. It gets to a point where you're like, what the hell else rhymes with this? It was very challenging, and although I did enjoy that challenge, I do think that if it would have been free write, it would have been a better story. But as a creator, I want to challenge myself in that box. But that collection also includes something really personal. When my dad passed away, when I was 23, it's just a weird process, the passing of your parent and just coping with that. And years later, I wrote a poem titled "The Box," about the experience of being there and seeing all these people who came to my dad's funeral, but who weren't necessarily there, and also the people that were there with us every step of the way in terms of dad's condition. It's 1 page, and I had someone come up to me the last year and say, I wanted to thank you for this collection. I'm like, oh, is there anything that stood out? And she choked up and she's like, I also lost my dad, so I knew it was that poem. And she's like, and it was really weird to read something that understood what I felt when he passed away. And it's one of about 6 or 7 times at a convention where someone has either brought me something or told me something that I'm like, okay, don't lose it here because you have to sell books and you have to look professional. But that one really got to me. And that was really special. And she's a very sweet girl, and she's also writing poetry. And once in a while they leave a comment on Instagram on some random stuff that I leave, and she has something positive to say always. And that's as gratifying as anything that I can describe. Third collection, Captured Moments. That one's a little more political. I do explore certain topics like equality, because equality and racism. And the first poem, it's about equality. I have an issue trying to understand the logic behind wage gaps and things to ensure everyone's safe, and policies that are passed. And just for someone to say, oh, because of that gender, they can't do X or Y thing. And I'm like, why? I don't get it. And I expressed that in that collection. Not always. There's also a poem about a really cheeky poem about cantaloupes, because sometimes you need to laugh. In terms of equality, I also explore the topic of racism, because it's another topic that I don't get. Luckily I haven't faced much racism stateside or back home. Because being stateside, since I'm pretty fluent in English, most people don't even realize that I'm from Puerto Rico. And I've heard some really choice comments that you go like, that's a nice sentiment. I don't think we need to talk anymore ever. But that would be irresponsible. Trying to see someone's perspective, even if it's unpleasant, is rewarding. And it gets to the point where you see insights of life. So I wrote a poem that is called Equals, that explores why we're really all the same and how one person from one race or another can save your life. It's just something that to me makes all the sense in the world. The fourth collection, I'm actually thinking in order of publishing. I think the fourth collection was actually my first collection of Spanish poetry. It's weird. My first language is Spanish, and I'm really insecure writing and publishing in it. That's just the way I'm built. And, you know, it's a very personal collection. And I think it's interesting because my voice in English and Spanish they're not drastically different. They just dive into different pools. In terms of fantasy and science fiction and weird concepts and just creativity, English is my vehicle of choice. But when it comes to saying something personal and something that can probably smack you across the face, in terms of being personal and sometimes highly politicized, Spanish apparently is my go-to vehicle. So maybe I'll explore nonfiction in Spanish more in the future. That said, Pensando en Metáforas, which is translated as Thinking in Metaphors, and my wife actually did the cover for that one and 2020, which is my bilingual collection. But Pensando en Metáforas is a very personal collection. And about half of it was written while mom was either dealing with, recovering from, or getting treatment for breast cancer. And it's a lot of tributes to mom in the poems. So it's, again, I'm not secure publishing in this, and it's very personal, and I still published it. So if you have something personal, by all means, let it go. Fifth collection is actually Black Tie Affair. Black Tie Affair is my tribute to Charles Bukowski, which I think is the first poet I read that really kind of broke me. I remember the first time I read Hank, and just reading a poem and finishing it and just hovering over the book for a while and just feeling really uneasy and not necessarily finding it unpleasant. So I strived to make a poetry collection that is best enjoyed with dark lighting and your spirit of choice. Bourbon is a good choice. Whiskey is a good choice. Wine apparently is also a good choice. Different people have told me, oh, I read it while drinking this. And it's not that I want to promote alcoholism, but it is the essence and the style that I was going for. It's the first one and the only one that actually has adult language. And I try, if something's going to have adult language, I'm going to go all in, and it's not just going to be like, a random F-bomb here and there, but also not use it as a tool, not a crutch. I've read books where people, they use adult language because it's edgy, because it's cool, because that's what the market wants. And to me, it comes off as juvenile and lazy. In this collection, I wanted it to add an extra punch, because also I don't typically use adult language, so that people, when they read it, they go like, oh my, he wrote that. Mm-hmm. And so it's that. And the last poetry collection I've released so far is called Roulette of Rhymes, and it is me pushing as much variety as possible, as in pushing myself in terms of form, structure, topics, style, rhyme, meter, whatever. And it also includes the longest poem I've published yet, which is The Madness of Jonathan J. George, which is an epic poem in 8 movements, 100 lines to a movement. Each movement has either its own style or rhyme scheme. Some are free writes, others are really rigid rhyme scheme, other are or a bit more flexible, but have some rhyme and alliteration and different things. And again, it's just me challenging myself in terms of how much I can explore madness in an epic poem. That's poetry. After that, there's a short story collection, which is a middle grade short story collection, because obviously if I write about something that's inspired with whiskey and wine and vampires, I have to write something middle grade. And I'm actually working on a middle grade fantasy, but I'll talk about that later. This is actually published. It's called The Daydreams on the Sherbet Shore, and it is my wish to offer people modern day bedtime stories. They're whimsical, they're fun. You know, if you see the news any given day, if you see the news for 3 days nonstop, you're going to be depressed automatically, I think. So it's me offering something silly and cheeky, where the sand on Draim, which is the dream world, and I spelled Draim and reality because sometimes dreams get things backwards, and so does reality. But the sand on the Sherbet Shore, depending on the time of year, in the morning it can taste like mangoes or oranges, depending on the time of the year, and in the afternoon it can taste like plums or grapes. To give you an example of what you can find there, you visit the Kung Fu Circus, which is, I think, out of all of the things that I've written, if I could see something in real life, I think that would be awesome. The Kung Fu Circus would be awesome. So yeah, and at the end of that collection, I did include poetry, but more geared to a younger audience, because again, poetry is not just one thing and not just for one audience. It's something that I think kids can benefit, and technically Dr. Seuss is poetry.
Classic.
Yeah, and Green Eggs and Ham, I think the total, you know, he reshuffles things, but I think it's 68 different words. It's a very limited amount of words that he reuses to make an entire book, and I think that's a fascinating concept. I don't know if I could pull that off and to such an effect, but that just makes it more amazing to me. And finally, the last thing I've published is my bilingual collection, which is 2020. The first half is in English, the second half is in Spanish, and it's divided by a Spanglish poem. It is 4 stanzas. First stanza is 4 English lines. Second one is 2 English lines, 2 Spanish lines. Then it's 1 English line, 1 Spanish line, 1 English line, 1 Spanish line. Then it's 2 English, 2 Spanish again, and then 4 Spanish, and it rhymes. So it was pretty challenging, but it was trying to explain what living a bilingual life is like. You know, I can't imagine what a trilingual or a multilingual life is like, but at least bilingual, I always have both engines running simultaneously. And sometimes when you're doing translation work, it is draining because you're using both those brains at 100% and not necessarily in a way where you're flowing, but you know, you're putting a lot of effort. But I'm always thinking in both languages. And when I switch from Spanish to English and English to Spanish, people sometimes go like, you're kind of weird. And I have to just nod and say yes. That one actually includes essays, poetry, and short stories in both languages. And I think that one better explains what I was talking about in terms of Spanish being more honest and in your face and political to a certain degree, and English being more fantasy, sci-fi-ish, and just more creative in its approach. It's actually a book that not a lot of people have picked up, but they have picked it up in a website that if people want to buy me physically, they can do it through Amazon, but I'm prompting everyone to go to Libros 787, which is actually a Puerto Rico-based and Puerto Rican-owned company. Their mission is to get as many Puerto Rican authors and to promote it and distribute it throughout the world. And they launched that company like a month after Hurricane Maria. So they're doing it for the island. Obviously, they want to be successful as a business, but obviously they're doing something really positive and growing in a time where Puerto Rico is going through a really rough patch. So obviously, they have my 100,000% support. I'm also doing Estrada crates, which is another way that people can get my physical books. But the only way that people can get extra content in terms of me is buying it through Libro 787. If anyone buys any book through that website, they just need to show me their receipt or something, and I'll send them. I also play guitar and sing. I have three tracks that I actually recorded in a studio, and I'll send them those tracks for free if they buy it through them. So as you can see, I like to be all over the place and express myself creatively.
I love it. You're definitely not like stuck in one area.
No. I am. I describe myself as a Renaissance geek.
I like it. Well, I have loved our conversation, even though I was not visible because I was nodding frantically at everything you said. But I want to end it here, not because I don't want to talk longer, but because I know attention spans are kind of weak.
Yeah.
And but I would love to have you come back again and talk more.
Yeah. I have a lot of projects on the go. The last thing I'm going to say is that I finally, I'm about to receive the proof of a new book, which just to get to that point, this has been one of the hardest points. It's my first nonfiction book, so I'm also going to dive into that pool.
Very cool. And do we have a topic, or is that going to be a surprise?
The topic is varied. It is a selection from my blog. My blog is called For Writing Out Loud. And basically, I curated blog posts and then I edited them so it's not just a copy-paste job. It's a copy-paste format, structure it so that it makes sense as a book. And with nonfiction, I'm always going to try, part of my mission as a human is to try to have a positive impact in any way that I can. And I think that book is the first step to making it very, very overt. It's like I'm releasing this to try to inspire or to motivate one person. If I motivate more than one person, I did a good job. If I motivate a bunch of people and people really like my nonfiction, that'll be weird, but I'll take it. But the main thing is to have people read it and say, let's do this, whatever this is.
Very cool. See, I told you I'd say very cool. I ended it with very cool. Well, thank you so much, JD. And I look forward to checking out your work. And I hope everyone out in YouTube land will also do the same.
Okay. Thank you.